My 10-year-old grandson slapped me across the face and my son laughed. My daughter-in-law clapped. That day, I said nothing. But 3 weeks later, they got a letter from the school that left them speechless. You ever have one of those moments where time just stops? Like your brain hits pause because it can't quite believe what your eyes just saw. That was me right there in my own living room, on a warm Georgia afternoon, standing a few feet away from my 10-year-old grandson, Ethan, who had just slapped me across the face. Yes, slapped. Not one of those playful little pats kids do when they're being silly. No, this was a full-handed, stinging slap that landed so hard my earring actually fell out. I remember feeling the heat spread across my cheek. That sharp, shocking burn that comes when your body realizes you've just been disrespected in a way you never imagined. And then came the laughter. My son Michael, sitting right there on the couch with his phone in his hand, looked up, smirked, and actually laughed. "He's just playing with you, Mom," he said, like this was some kind of family comedy sketch instead of pure humiliation. And Heather, my daughter-in-law, the self-proclaimed queen of modern parenting, she clapped her hands together and said, "If you're so tough, hit him back. But you won't dare." She actually encouraged it. I stood there frozen, my mind spinning, my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break out. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just said quietly, "It's okay." But it wasn't. Not even close. Something deep inside me cracked that day. Something I didn't even know could break after 65 years of holding this family together through every storm life threw at us. I remember walking to the kitchen, pretending to tidy up just so I wouldn't have to look at them. They went right back to laughing and scrolling through their phones like nothing had happened, like it was normal to watch your mother, your grandmother, get smacked in the face by a 10-year-old. And in that moment, I realized something painful. I had become invisible in my own house. I was the live-in babysitter, the unpaid maid, the woman they tolerated because I cooked and helped with bills. The grandma who doesn't understand modern parenting. That's what Heather once called me. But that day, that slap reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. I was just quiet. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in my little room at the end of the hall. The moonlight came through the blinds, landing right on a framed photo of baby Ethan the day he was born. I remember holding him in that picture, his tiny fingers gripping my necklace, my heart bursting with love. I'd called him my little sunshine. And looking at that picture now, with my cheeks still faintly red, I whispered, "You were my sunshine once." My eyes stung, but not from tears, from the ache of realizing how much had changed. I thought about Michael, my only son. I raised him on my own after his father passed. I worked 2 jobs, missed meals, saved every dime so he could have the life I never did. And now here I was being laughed at in my own home by him and his wife, because I was too sensitive to a slap. I took a deep breath and reached for my laptop. I wasn't looking for comfort or distraction. No, I knew exactly what I was about to do. You see, for the past 3 years I'd been quietly paying for Ethan's private school. Every month, without fail, I transferred the money from the savings account my late husband, Frank, had left me. It wasn't something I bragged about. I never asked for thanks. I did it because I believed in education and because I wanted Ethan to have the best. I wanted him to grow up kind, humble, and smart, not spoiled and cruel. But as I opened my online banking that night and saw that tuition draft sitting there, ready for next month's payment, something in me shifted. That money wasn't helping him. It was feeding their arrogance. I stared at that number for a long while, sipping my cold chamomile tea, thinking about all the nights I'd gone without new clothes or skipped vacations so I could afford that tuition. For what? So they could raise a boy who thought hitting grandma was a joke. No, not anymore. I scrolled to the cancel recurring payment button and hovered over it for a moment. My heart pounded in my ears. I could almost hear Frank's voice, calm, steady, like he used to sound when he'd say, "You've got to teach people how to treat you, Ellen." My finger trembled for just a second. Then I clicked. Payment count. Just like that, the decision was made, and an odd sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. For years I'd been the peacekeeper, the quiet fixer. Whenever there was tension in the house, I'd smooth it over. When Heather snapped, I'd bite my tongue. When Michael ignored me, I'd tell myself he's busy. I thought keeping the peace meant keeping the family together, but peace built on disrespect isn't peace. It's surrender. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of a television still on in the living room. Somewhere in the house, I could hear Ethan's laughter, carefree, innocent. And for a moment, I almost regretted what I'd done. Almost. But then I touched my cheek, the faint bruise still warm under my fingertips. And I remembered the sound of my son's laughter right after that slap. That sound would echo in my mind for a long time. As I turned off the lamp and lay down, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe this wasn't punishment. Maybe it was a lesson, one they didn't know they needed yet. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not sadness, not anger, but strength. Quiet, steady strength. The kind that doesn't scream or slam doors. The kind that simply says, enough? And little did they know, the lesson was already in motion. In a few short weeks, when that tuition bill came due, and no payment arrived, when the fancy private school sent that little white envelope marked notice of termination, they'd finally understand respect isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn. The next morning, the house smelled like cinnamon, waffles, and new beginnings. Or at least that's what Heather called it. She was buzzing around the kitchen like a bee with a phone glued to her hand, taking photos of Ethan's back-to-school outfit for her followers. He's going to look so sharp. My little man ready for 4th grade. She said in that singing voice she uses when she's performing for social media. Ethan stood there posing like he was in a commercial, his slick new backpack still with the tag dangling off the side. I sat at the kitchen table, stirring my tea slowly, watching the whole show unfold. You ever notice how quiet revenge doesn't need words? It just needs patience. My cheek had healed, but the memory hadn't. Every time I caught my reflection, I could still feel that sting. Not just of the slap, but of my son's laughter. Michael came stumbling in, still half asleep, scratching his head and mumbling, "Morning." He barely glanced at me, grabbed his coffee, and said, "Mom, can you pick Ethan up after school tomorrow? Heather and I have a thing." His tone wasn't really a question. It was an expectation. I smiled and said, "Sure." My voice was steady, but inside my heart was doing somersaults. I'll be honest, I felt guilty. What kind of grandmother cancels her grandson's education? But then, like a whisper from my conscience, I remembered that slap, the laughter, the clapping, the mockery, and slowly that guilt started to fade away like morning fog, burned off by the sun. For the rest of the week, I went about my chores as usual, the same rhythm I'd kept since moving in with them 2 years ago. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, watered the plants on the porch, all while pretending everything was perfectly normal. But inside me there was this hum, this electric anticipation I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't anger, it was awareness, the calm before the storm. The tuition payment I'd counted was set to come due any day now. And though no one had noticed yet, I knew that envelope, that little white envelope with the school's crest, was going to arrive soon enough. I could almost see it in my mind, like a storm cloud forming on the horizon, quiet but powerful. And when it did, well, let's just say the thunder would be loud. Heather, of course, remained blissfully unaware. One morning while I was folding sheets in the laundry room, she came in bragging about how expensive but worth it Ethan's school was. "You just can't beat the kind of education he's getting there," she said, shaking her head like she was talking about a Harvard tuition bill instead of an elementary school. I gave her a little smile and said, "Yes, it takes a lot to maintain privileges these days." I meant it as a gentle warning, but she didn't even flinch, too busy scrolling through her phone. She just nodded absently, murmuring totally before walking out. I stood there for a long moment, holding that warm sheet in my hands, and I thought, you really don't see it coming, do you? That weekend, I decided to bake cookies with Ethan. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe I just missed the sweet little boy I used to know. The one who'd run to me with sticky fingers and a chocolate-smeared smile. He was different now, more guarded, more entitled, but I wanted to believe there was still a spark of that little sunshine I once held in my arms. We mixed flour and sugar, and for a while it felt nice. He laughed, and his laughter reminded me of better times. I started to think maybe I'd been too harsh. Maybe canceling the tuition was too extreme. Maybe there was still time to fix things before they got ugly. But then, just as I was scooping cookie dough onto the tray, he said something that made my hand freeze midair. "Grandma," he said innocently. "Mummy says, you're poor. That's why you live here." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. I stared at him, the spoon still dripping dough, my throat tightening. "She said what?" I asked softly, but he was already licking his fingers, completely unaware of the weight of his words. "Yeah," he continued casually. "Mommy said, you don't have your own house because you don't have enough money, so you have to live with us." I forced a smile because what else could I do? He was just repeating what he'd been told. Is that what she said? I asked. He nodded. But it's okay, Grandma. He added sweetly. I don't mind sharing our house. And then he smiled. Innocent, pure, completely oblivious. That broke me. I turned away quickly, pretending to check on the oven because I could feel the tears building behind my eyes. Poor. I wasn't poor. I'd just been quiet about my blessings. There's a difference. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat out on the porch wrapped in my old cardigan, staring at the stars. The cicadas hummed in the background, and for the first time in a long while, I thought about my late husband, Frank. He used to say, Ellen, money can make people loud, but grace always whispers. I'd lived my life by that. I never flaunted what I had, never needed to. When Michael and Heather bought this house, I offered to help with the down payment. They refused, saying they wanted to do it themselves. So instead, I paid for Ethan's school quietly, month after month, because that's what love does. It builds quietly. But somewhere along the line, they mistook quiet for weak. Over the next few days I watched them, really watched them. The way Heather barked orders, the way Michael dismissed me without listening, the way Ethan repeated phrases that were far too cruel for a child to have invented. It wasn't about the slap anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about respect, or the lack of it. I realized then that this moment, this little domestic calm, wasn't peace at all. It was arrogance wearing a mask of normally, and masks always slip eventually. One evening I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the kitchen window as I was washing dishes. I looked tired but lighter. There was a kind of quiet strength in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. Maybe it was the anticipation of what was coming. Or maybe it was the satisfaction of finally standing up for myself in my own way. The storm was approaching. I could feel it in the air. The letter would come soon, and when it did, all their laughter, their mockery, their smugness, it would crumble like a sand castle in the tide. I finished the dishes, wiped my hands, and smiled to myself. They think they know me. I whispered to the empty kitchen. But they have no idea what's coming. And as I turned off the light and went to bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile, temporary kind that depends on keeping everyone else happy, but the deep, quiet peace that comes when you finally choose yourself. Because sometimes the calm before the storm isn't fear, it's power. Monday morning came like any other, the smell of coffee, the sound of Ethan's feet thumping down the hallway, and the hum of Heather's blender, as she made her usual green smoothie she swore was anti-aging. The first day of school was supposed to be exciting. A fresh start, a day full of smiles and photos for her followers. The kitchen buzzed with the usual chatter, Ethan bragging about seeing his friends again, Heather barking orders about brushing teeth and packing lunches, and Michael glued to his phone. I stood quietly by the sink, washing my cup, pretending not to notice the way they moved around me like I was part of the furniture. But deep down I knew this was the day. The calm had passed. The storm was about to hit. Right on cue, a soft thump sounded at the door. The mail. Heather grabbed the pile, flipping through bills and ads until she saw it. A large white envelope with the school's logo, printed neatly in the corner. Oh, it's from the school, she chirped, her voice bubbling with excitement as she tore it open with her manicured nails. I didn't even have to turn around. I knew exactly what that letter said. I'd been waiting for this moment all week. But the sound that came out of her nest wasn't excitement. It was confusion. Wait, what? She whispered, her brows furrowing as she scanned the page. Then, louder this time, her voice rising like a siren. What do you mean tuition unpaid? Michael's head shot up from his phone. What are you talking about? He said, grabbing the paper from her. His eyes darted across the lines, his jaw tightening. That's impossible. Mom's been handling that. And there it was, the line that lit the fuse. I kept washing my cup, calm as could be. The sound of the running water, the only thing cutting through the tense silence. Then slowly I turned off the faucet, set the cup down, and turned around just as Michael spun toward me. Mum, he said sharply, did you forget to pay the tuition again? That tone, that patronizing little tilt in his voice. Oh, that one stung. As if I was some forgetful old woman who couldn't handle her own affairs. I dried my hands with the dish towel, folded it neatly, and looked him dead in the eye. No, Michael, I said, my voice calm, steady, deliberate. I didn't forget. I canceled it. The room went so silent you could have heard the refrigerator humming. Heather's jaw dropped open so wide she could have caught flies. You what? She screeched, her voice cracking like glass. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get him into that school? I shrugged. Oh, I do. I also know it's even harder to teach a child respect when the adults around him laugh at cruelty." Heather blinked, speechless for once. Michael's face went pale, the kind of pale that comes when you realize the person you thought was soft just drew a line you didn't see coming. "Mom," he said, his voice low but shaking. "You can't do that, you promised." I held up my hand. "I promised?" I interrupted. "When I was treated like family, not when I was treated like a joke." He opened his mouth to argue, but I could see he didn't even know where to start. Heather slammed the counter. "This is unbelievable. Do you know how embarrassing this is going to be? They already sent a notice." Her face turned red as she looked at the letter again, her eyes wide with panic. "They said, if it's not paid immediately, Ethan will lose his spot." I just nodded as calm as if she'd been talking about the weather. "Well," I said gently, "maybe it's time he learns that money doesn't grow on Grandma's back." That line landed like a punch. Michael ran a hand through his hair, muttering, "This can't be happening." Ethan, poor thing, was sitting at the table, looking from one adult to another, his eyes wide and glassy. "Grandma, did I do something bad?" he asked quietly. And that right there, that broke me a little. I knelt beside him, brushing his hair back gently. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "You didn't do anything bad. Sometimes adults have to learn lessons too." He frowned, confused, and I kissed his forehead. "You'll be okay." Behind me, Heather scoffed. "Oh, please. You're making this sound noble when it's just petty." I stood up slowly, turned to face her, and said, "No, Heather, it's not petty to demand respect. It's overdue." The look on her face, a mix of shock and rage, almost made me laugh. She wasn't used to me talking back. None of them were. Michael tried to regain control like he always does. "Mom, listen, we can fix this. I'll just move some things around, pay the balance, and next month you can resume the transfer." I smiled faintly. "There won't be a next month." "What do you mean?" he said, his voice rising. I said clearly, "I'm done paying for a household that treats me like a burden. If you want your son in that fancy school, you'll have to pay for it yourselves." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then shut it, realizing there was nothing left to say. Heather grabbed her keys and stormed out of the kitchen, muttering something about calling the school. Ethan started crying quietly, and my heart twisted. I didn't want him to feel pain. Not really. But I knew this was necessary. This family had forgotten the value of kindness, of gratitude. They needed a wake-up call. And sometimes the loudest message comes from silence, from absence. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. They couldn't laugh this off. They couldn't scroll past it. They had to see me, hear me, acknowledge me. Michael finally looked at me. Really looked at me. Not like a live-in helper, not like some fragile old woman, but like the mother who raised him, sacrificed for him, and just reminded him who I truly was. "Mom," he said quietly, "why would you do this?" I took a deep breath. "Because, Michael," I said, "when love turns into entitlement, it's no longer love. It's time to remind this family where the love came from and what happens when it's taken for granted." He didn't answer. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes distant. I turned back to the sink, rinsed my cup again, and said softly, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have cookies to bake." And as the oven warmed behind me, the air still thick with silence and disbelief, I realized something powerful. For the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel small. I felt heard. The storm had finally broken, and I was standing right in the middle of it, calm, steady, and unshaken. For 3 long days, not a single word was spoken in that house. No laughter, no chatter, not even the usual bickering between Michael and Heather. The silence was thick. You could almost hear it pressing against the walls. Heather clanged pots and slammed cabinets like punctuation marks of her anger. Michael sulked, eyes glued to his phone, pretending he had nothing to say. And little Ethan, he stayed unusually quiet. No mischief, no laughter, just a soft, watchful silence. It was as if everyone was waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to undo what I'd done. But I didn't. In fact, I slept better than I had in months. You see, sometimes peace doesn't come from everyone liking you. Sometimes it comes from finally being respected, even if that respect starts in silence. On the 4th morning, I heard a knock on my door. Not a hard, impatient one, but a soft, hesitant tap. "Come in," I said, folding my quilt. Michael stepped inside, looking different. His shoulders drooped, his face tired. "Mom," he said quietly, "we got Ethan into public school. It's not as fancy, but we'll manage." His tone carried something I hadn't heard in years. Humility. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Good," I said simply. "That's what parents are supposed to do." He paused, waiting for me to scold or gloat, but I didn't. There was no need. The lesson was already unfolding on its own. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, the tension in the house began to melt. I noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. Ethan was changing. Gone were the designer shoes and fancy backpacks. He wasn't bragging about field trips or showing off gadgets. Instead, he talked about new friends, about a teacher who loved art, about how he helped another boy who forgot his lunch. His laughter sounded different, lighter, more real. For the first time, I saw the boy I'd held as a baby, not the one shaped by entitlement, but the one born from love. One afternoon, I was sitting by the window knitting when I heard a soft knock. "Come in," I said, expecting it to be Heather asking about dinner. But it was Ethan clutching something in his hand. "Grandma," he said shrilly, "I made this for you." He handed it to me, eyes down. On the paper, drawn in shaky crayon lines, was a picture of the two of us holding hands under a big bright sun. Across the top, in uneven letters, he'd written, "Me and Grandma." My throat tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I whispered. He hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "I'm sorry I hit you." Those 5 little words broke me and healed me all at once. I pulled him close, holding him tight. "Thank you, baby," I said, tears slipping down my cheeks. Now that's what I call real learning, because this right here was the kind of education no private school could ever give. Not math or science or manners rehearsed for show, but humility, empathy, and love. As weeks passed, Heather began to soften too. She wasn't as sharp, her tone gentler, her glances less cold. Maybe she realized what pride had cost her. Maybe silence teaches more than words ever could. Michael started spending more time with his son, helping with homework, laughing again. And Ethan, my sweet boy, would come sit beside me every morning while I sipped my tea. We talk about his day or sometimes just sit in quiet peace. Now when I look out that window every morning, tea warming my hands, I smile. Not because I won or proved a point, but because I found peace. They learned that respect can't be demanded. It must be earned. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's calm, patient, and wrapped in the kind of silence that speaks louder than words ever could. If this story made you smile, think, or maybe even tear up a little, hit that subscribe button, because every week I share real stories from strong women who've been underestimated and came out stronger. Don't miss the next one. You never know whose story might feel a little like yours.